Let me tell you something strange about growth. Most people think transformation is loud. They imagine dramatic breakthroughs, public success stories, before and after photos, triumphant speeches about becoming a new person. But real transformation rarely looks like that. Most of the time, outgrowing your past happens quietly. It happens in the moments nobody notices, in the conversations you no longer enjoy, in the habits that suddenly feel heavy, in the places that once felt like home, but now make you feel like a stranger in your own skin. And maybe you've felt that lately. Maybe you've looked around at your old life and realized something unsettling. The version of you that once fit here perfectly no longer exists. And that realization can feel both freeing and heartbreaking at the same time. Because nobody really talks about the psychology of outgrowing your past. Nobody talks about the guilt that comes with changing. The loneliness of becoming someone your old environment no longer understands, or the strange grief that appears when you realize you've evolved beyond the person you once fought so hard to become. See, human beings are deeply attached to familiarity, even painful familiarity. Psychologists call this cognitive consistency. The mind prefers what feels predictable because predictability feels safe. That's why people often stay connected to identities, relationships, and routines long after they've stopped nourishing them. Not because they're happy, but because the unknown feels terrifying. And when someone begins to outgrow their past, they're not just changing habits, they're disrupting their entire psychological comfort zone. Suddenly, the jokes don't land the same way anymore. The conversations feel repetitive. The chaos you once normalized starts feeling exhausting instead of exciting. You begin craving peace in places where you once craved validation. And that's when the conflict begins, because growth has a strange way of making your old life feel smaller, while simultaneously making you feel guilty for noticing it. You start wondering if you're becoming arrogant, ungrateful, detached, but often you're not becoming cold, you're becoming conscious. There's an important psychological shift that happens when people outgrow their past. Their identity stops being built around survival and starts being built around alignment. And those are two very different things. Survival asks, what do I need to do to be accepted? Alignment asks, what actually feels true to who I am now? That transition changes everything because many people spend years becoming versions of themselves that were necessary at the time. Maybe you became overly agreeable because conflict felt unsafe growing up. Maybe you became emotionally unavailable because vulnerability once led to disappointment. Maybe you became loud, funny, ambitious, hyper-independent, or endlessly productive because those traits helped you survive a certain chapter of your life. But eventually, survival mechanisms start becoming emotional prisons. What once protected you begins limiting you. And the moment you recognize that, you can never fully go back to being who you were before. That's the uncomfortable reality of growth. Awareness changes your relationship with everything. Suddenly you notice patterns you once ignored. You recognize emotional manipulation faster. You stop romanticizing unhealthy dynamics. You become more selective with your energy, your time, your attention. And not everyone likes that version of you, because people often feel most comfortable with the version of you they can predict. The moment you begin changing, some people interpret your growth as rejection, not because you're hurting them intentionally, but because your transformation forces them to confront their own stagnation. And psychologically, that can make others defensive. There's actually a term for this, homeostasis. In psychology, systems naturally resist change in order to maintain balance. Families do this, friend groups do this, relationships do this. The moment one person evolves, the entire system feels disrupted, so people unconsciously try to pull you back into your old identity. They remind you who you used to be. They joke about the old version of you. They expect you to tolerate things you've outgrown. And for a while, you might try. You might shrink yourself just to keep everyone comfortable. But eventually, something inside you starts resisting. Because once your mind expands emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, it becomes painful to force yourself back into spaces that no longer fit your growth. And this is where many people experience a kind of invisible loneliness. One of the deepest forms of loneliness isn't being alone. It's being surrounded by people who only understand the outdated version of you. People who keep speaking to your past while you're desperately trying to become your future. That That disconnect creates emotional exhaustion. You begin feeling unseen in rooms where you once felt understood. Not because anyone changed overnight, but because you did. And maybe the hardest part is this: outgrowing your past doesn't only mean leaving painful things behind. Sometimes it means outgrowing beautiful things too. Old friendships that once saved you, places filled with memories, versions of yourself that carried you through difficult seasons. That's why growth often feels like grief, because psychologically every transformation contains a small death. The death of familiarity, the death of identity, the death of certainty. People think healing feels light all the time, but often healing feels like mourning the person you no longer are. There's a concept in psychology called self-discrepancy theory. It explains the emotional tension between who we currently are, who we used to be, and who we want to become. When those identities clash, it creates anxiety, sadness, confusion, even guilt. That's why personal growth can feel emotionally disorienting. One part of you wants to evolve while another part clings to what feels familiar. You simultaneously miss your old self and know you can never return to them completely. And maybe you felt that contradiction, missing versions of yourself that were unhappy simply because they were familiar, missing people you know were unhealthy for you because they once made you feel needed, missing environments that drained you because at least they were predictable. The human brain often confuses familiarity with safety, but they're not the same thing. Something can feel familiar and still slowly destroy you. That's why outgrowing your past requires more than motivation. It requires emotional courage. The courage to disappoint the version of you that settled for less. The courage to release identities that no longer reflect who you're becoming. The courage to walk away from environments that only nourish your old wounds. And here's the strange part. Growth rarely feels triumphant while it's happening. Most of the time, it feels uncomfortable, lonely, and uncertain. Because you're existing between identities. You're no longer who you were, but you're not fully who you're becoming yet either. Psychologists sometimes call this the liminal stage, the in-between phase of transformation, where your old identity no longer fits, but your new identity hasn't stabilized yet. And that stage can feel incredibly disorienting. You question yourself constantly. You wonder if you're making mistakes. You wonder if you should go back to who you used to be, because at least it felt predictable. But that's the psychology of growth. The mind always tries to return to familiarity before it adapts to expansion. And the people who truly outgrow their past learn something powerful during this stage. They learn that discomfort is not always a warning sign. Sometimes it's evidence of evolution. Sometimes the anxiety you're feeling isn't because you're failing. It's because your identity is restructuring itself in real time. Think about how strange it is to become a completely different person while still carrying memories from your old self. You remember what used to matter to you, but it no longer resonates the same way. You look back at old versions of yourself almost like reading chapters from someone else's story, and that can create an emotional split inside you. Part compassion, part embarrassment, part nostalgia. But psychologically, that's normal. Human beings are not meant to remain psychologically static. Your brain literally rewires itself through experience. Every heartbreak, every lesson, every disappointment, every moment of awareness reshapes the way you perceive yourself and the world around you. That's neuroplasticity. The mind adapts based on what it survives and what it learns, which means the person you are today is not separate from your past. They're the result of it, and maybe that's important to remember. Outgrowing your past doesn't mean hating who you used to be. It means understanding that version of yourself served a purpose for a certain season of your life. They got you here, even if they were insecure, even if they made mistakes, even if they tolerated things you would never tolerate now. That version of you was doing the best they could with the awareness they had at the time. And healing begins when you stop viewing your old self as someone to be ashamed of and start viewing them as someone who carried you through darkness. Because people who truly evolve don't erase their past. They integrate it. They stop running from old wounds and start understanding them. They stop pretending painful chapters never happened and start realizing those chapters shaped their emotional depth. There's also something else that happens when people outgrow their past. Their tolerance for superficiality decreases dramatically. Small talk feels draining. Forced connections feel obvious. Performative relationships become exhausting. It's It's not because they're becoming antisocial. It's because once you've experienced deep internal transformation, shallow interactions stop satisfying you emotionally. You begin craving authenticity more than attention, peace more than stimulation, meaning more than approval. And that shift changes the way you move through the world. You become quieter in certain spaces, more observant, more intentional, not because you've lost yourself, but because you've finally started listening to yourself. One of the most overlooked signs of emotional growth is no longer needing to explain your transformation to everyone. In the beginning, people often feel desperate to justify why they're changing. They want others to understand their boundaries, their distance, their new priorities. But eventually, something shifts. You realize not everyone is meant to understand your evolution. Some people only knew the version of you that abandoned themselves for connection. And when you stop abandoning yourself, the relationship naturally changes. That's not cruelty, that's self-respect. But still, outgrowing your past can feel deeply isolating at times, especially when your external life no longer reflects your internal growth yet. Maybe you're emotionally healthier now, but still surrounded by old environments. Maybe your mindset has evolved, but your circumstances haven't caught up yet. That gap can feel frustrating. You become aware of how much no longer aligns while still being temporarily connected to it. And psychologically, awareness without immediate change can create emotional tension. But this is important. Growth is not always visible immediately. Sometimes transformation happens internally, long before your life outwardly reflects it. Just because your environment hasn't changed yet doesn't mean you haven't. A seed underground still grows even before anyone sees it break through the surface. And maybe that's what so many people misunderstand about personal evolution. They think growth should always look exciting and obvious, but often the deepest transformations happen invisibly, quietly, internally. In the way you respond differently to situations that once triggered you, in the way you stop chasing people who confuse inconsistency with love, in the way you start protecting your peace instead of constantly proving your worth. Those shifts may look small from the outside, but psychologically they're enormous. Because the moment someone stops abandoning themselves for approval, their entire inner world begins changing. And here's another uncomfortable truth. Sometimes people romanticize their past because their present feels uncertain. The mind edits memories emotionally. It softens certain details, exaggerates others. That's why people often feel tempted to return to old relationships, old habits, old identities during lonely periods of growth. Not because those things were healthy, but because uncertainty feels heavier than familiarity. But every time you return to an outdated version of yourself, just to escape discomfort, you betray the person you're becoming. And deep down, you feel it. That's why growth often requires grieving fantasies as much as realities. The fantasy that certain people would eventually understand you. The fantasy that old environments would suddenly become healthy. The fantasy that you could evolve without losing anything. But transformation always costs something. Usually comfort, usually familiarity, sometimes relationships. But what it gives you in return is something far more valuable. Yourself. The real version of you hidden underneath years of conditioning, performance, fear, and survival. And maybe that's why people who outgrow their past often become calmer over time. Not because life becomes perfect, but because they stop fighting themselves internally. They stop forcing themselves into identities that no longer fit. They stop begging for belonging in spaces that require self-betrayal. They begin choosing alignment over attachment. And that's one of the most psychologically freeing things a human being can do. To stop shrinking yourself just to remain emotionally convenient for others. To stop apologizing for evolving. To stop carrying guilt for becoming more aware. Because the truth is, you were never meant to stay the same forever. Human beings are designed to evolve. Your mind changes. Your values change. Your emotional needs change. And the people who outgrow their past aren't abandoning life. They're finally stepping into it consciously. They're learning that growth isn't about becoming superior to others. It's about becoming honest with yourself. Honest about what hurts you. Honest about what fulfills you. Honest about who you are when nobody else is influencing your identity. And maybe that's the real psychology behind people who outgrow their past. They reach a point where staying the same becomes more painful than changing. So they slowly release the identities environments and patterns that no longer reflect who they're becoming, not with anger, not with arrogance, but with awareness. Because eventually you realize something important. You can appreciate your past without living inside it forever. You can love people and still outgrow them. You can honor old versions of yourself without remaining trapped inside them. And maybe maturity is learning that growth will always feel a little lonely at first, because every transformation separates you from the person you once were. But loneliness is not always loss. Sometimes it's simply the space where your new self begins forming. So if you've been feeling disconnected from your old life lately, if certain places no longer feel the same, if old conversations feel empty, if you've been grieving versions of yourself nobody else notices, maybe you're not lost, maybe you're growing, maybe your mind is finally refusing to settle for identities that no longer align with your soul, and maybe that's not something to fear. Maybe that's the beginning of becoming who you were always meant to be. Because in the end, people who outgrow their past are not rejecting their history. They're learning from it. They're carrying the wisdom without carrying the chains. They're realizing that healing is not returning to who you were before life hurt you. It's becoming someone new because of what you survived. And that's a different kind of strength entirely. Quiet, unseen, but deeply transformative.